Welcome to the podcast. It's the Godward Show. I'm your host, Casey. Welcome to episode 50 of the podcast. We made it, gang. Keep listening, and very quickly we'll get into some seriously profound stuff from Sophocles, including significant reference to the Harry and Meghan scandal. But, and I promise not to do this again until episode 100, there have to be some minor housekeeping notes here. Just give me 90 seconds and then we'll get to the stuff. First, number one, the videos, my whole archive, which is not insignificant now, is all available on Odyssey. That's ODYSEE.com. And I expect you to watch all those videos there now in addition to on YouTube from here on out. The link will be in the description. Check it out kind of seriously. It seems worth investing the little time it takes to make an account and get a feel for it because, as everyone knows, we need a real alternative to YouTube so that, the censorship stuff goes away. And this one is blockchain-based, I guess, and so maybe immune to that kind of thing. Number two, I haven't said this before, but I recently discovered that the best way to listen to this podcast is at 1.25x. And if you're not watching live during the premiere, try that. It is perfect. Third, I also want to advise you to take a look at the playlists on my channel. I haven't mentioned these much, but I think they're looking good now. This is where I have the videos grouped according to different categories so you can explore your own interests in the, again, now not insubstantial archive. Number four, I know it's lame, but please do like the video and leave a comment. Everybody says that helps to boost the channel. And although I want to keep my channel, the viewer quality of my channel very high, which I think I've done so far, I do aspire to reach more potentially interested people. So if you know anybody, who might like to learn more about the classics and stuff, this is the place, man. Bring them in. And the last point, lastly, get psyched for this Friday's secret stream, fellow patrons. We'll be taking a look at ancient megaliths and doing lots of wild speculation about, ancient aliens and so on. So bring some content. The Patreon link is in the description if you still want to join. Okay, that's all. That's all for the housekeeping stuff. Now, on to Sophocles. Today's episode is on Sophocles, and although I'm going to briefly summarize the whole Oedipus Cycle in just a second, I'm going to focus the remainder of the episode on his last play, a play he wrote in the prime of his life, around 441 BC. The play is called Antigone. If you really want to get the full vibe of this episode, you'd be smart to go back and listen to my episodes on Herodotus and Thucydides for historical context, and the one on Heraclitus for philosophical background, and the one on Aeschylus to get a sense of what Greek drama was doing the generation before Sophocles. One of the main things you get on this channel is that you're following me, my own efforts to understand the whole picture of the classical world. And so whenever possible, we should be filling in the timeline, sort of stringing together the relevant puzzle pieces in hopes that eventually the whole picture will come into focus. That's what I tell my kids too. I've been homeschooling them this year. It's like, you have to build a timeline in your head. That's the whole thing. It's like, get it going. It doesn't matter where you start, but just start filling in stuff. And as you fill it in, the picture starts to emerge. You start to understand better the world that existed then. Let me take a drink of my sparkling water here. Okay. As for the summary, the Oedipus Cycle, the so-called Oedipus Cycle, is probably the best-known trilogy from ancient Greek drama, mainly probably thanks to Freud's use of the Oedipus story, in a manner that compares easily to Aeschylus's cursed house of Atreus, which was the basis for his Orestia cycle. Sophocles' story focuses on the curse of Laius's family, where Laius was Oedipus's father. The drama sort of all begins really before this trilogy, with the prophecy Laius hears that his own son will one day kill him. Laius responds by piercing the baby's heels and leaving him out to die in the wilderness. But just as we saw with the Cyrus episode in Herodotus, a shepherd finds the baby and raises it. Eventually, the baby, Oedipus, hears from the oracle of Delphi about the prophecy and then, sort of rationally, wishes to avoid fulfilling it. He stays away from the town, Thebes, where he knows his father is, but one day, by chance, he runs into Laius out on the road, not knowing it's Laius, and more or less in self-defense, he kills him. He then goes on to kill the Sphinx that had protected Thebes and then marries Jocasta, his own mother, again, without understanding what he's doing. He then has some kids by her. I know, cringe, but it happens, I guess. And then he discovers the mess he's made. On that discovery, it's one of the great, like Aristotle talks a lot about it as one of the great scenes of recognition in the classic literature. He gouges out his own eyeballs off stage and commits himself to lifelong exile from the city. It's an unbelievably good play, Oedipus Rex. The second part of the trilogy, which I think was actually written last of all, the one least talked about these days, is called Oedipus at Colonus, or Colonus. Colonus is a place just outside Athens where there's a statue of some horseman guy who was revered by the Athenians. Basically what happened is Oedipus had been wandering around in the wilderness for 20 years, blind, but led around by his loyal daughter Antigone. There are some great paintings of this wandering. Let's look at them over the next few seconds. Finally, Oedipus arrives at Colonus and calls for the king of Athens, a guy named Theseus. The great king comes out to meet him, hears his story, really has already heard his story, his fame or his infamy is great, and the king agrees to give him protection after hearing Oedipus explain how it wasn't his fault. He didn't intend any of this grotesque stuff. But then Oedipus's son Polynices shows up, and Creon, the king of Thebes, shows up. Creon is the brother of Oedipus's mom. Somehow there arises this sort of political tug of war over what will be the fate of Oedipus, where like Athens wants to protect him and Thebes wants to damn him, more or less. Eventually, Athens wins, which of course pleases Sophocles' audience, because they're basically in Athens, and Oedipus's body is sort of literally taken up, very mystically, into the clouds, or else it vanished into the earth. No one really knows, but it just vanished. The body disappeared. It becomes a secret that no one can ever know. Only Theseus saw what happened, and he refuses to speak of it. Interesting side note on that play, the middle one in the trilogy, it was evidently written as late as 406 BC, when Sophocles himself was 89 years old after 25 years of the raging Peloponnesian War, at a time when like Athens was basically shattered. Actually, one more, I guess, like a footnote there to that story, Oedipus at Colonus. It sort of ends in a really interesting way. As Oedipus is dying, he calls his children to him, and he says, and I think that these 6 lines are really interesting. They give you a sense of like what Athens was thinking in the year. It actually wasn't performed until after he died, so around the year 406 to 401 BC. Quote, "Children, this day your father is gone from you. All that was mine is gone. You shall no longer bear the burden of taking care of me. I know it was hard, my children, and yet one word frees us of all the weight and pain of life. That word is love." That's pretty interesting, isn't it? I know that the essence of the blue pill is sort of that, and you guys aren't into that very much. But remember, you guys, that you have to enter the kingdom of heaven as little children. I mean, look, yes, power is something. Foucault had a good point. And, the book of Esther teaches us that conniving subversion can be a path to political power. But in the end, if you do not have love, this is paraphrasing Corinthians, you have nothing. I just think that's interesting because it's sort of the last word of the last of the Golden Age Greek dramatist on his 89th birthday. Love, you understand? And the way I understand this, in a political sense, is that this is part of the logos question. Basically, civilization does depend on this kind of love or caritas. You may be able to worm your way into a position of power by being subversive, but if in doing so you wreck that essential social trust that ties people together in your society, that underlying caritas, then you've sort of subverted yourself ultimately. Your own power position will rapidly become worthless as things descend into general chaos. Okay, so anyway, that's the action of the first two parts of the trilogy. The third, which is Antigone, as far as I know, it's the highest Greek conception of the perennial tension between the claims made by the state and the claims made by our own inward sense of the eternal law of God. Part of what makes this play so good is that it is presented in extremely simple terms. Indeed, all of Sophocles' audience would have already known all the major points of the story, which was at least as familiar to them as something like Star Wars is to Americans. The story is a palimpsest of revision, which is to say it had been told over and over again, and it's generally agreed that Sophocles' version of it is sort of perfection. Although, I guess to give him credit, Euripides did a later version about 30 years later that is also very good. Anyway, Aristotle writes a good deal of praise about Sophocles in his book, The Poetics, and the praise has been pretty consistent ever since. As I said, a summary of Antigone is very easy because it's a simple story. Basically, there was a civil war in Thebes, and Antigone's two brothers, Polynices and Eteocles, took opposing sides. So after the war is sort of sorted out on the battlefield and the two brothers have killed each other, this according to a prophecy made by their father, the king, Creon, seeks to punish the losing side, Polynices' faction. And so he orders a decree not to let anyone bury the body of Polynices. And this is like the prime mover in this story. In the mind of Creon, Polynices is a traitor, and Creon intends to rule with an iron fist, so to speak. Antigone finds this edict, a law passed specifically to spite her own brother Polynices, she finds this intolerable, and so she goes out and buries the body herself. The rest of the play is basically just the fallout of that renegade act. So let's go ahead and think about it some. I mean, which side are we on here? Does the state have a sort of ultimate claim on us? Or are we, at bottom, with Antigone and Jesus Christ on the side of God and love? That is, willing to stick by those transcendent things that we believe to be true eternally, no matter what the state threatens us with. The play opens the day after Thebes rebuffed the attack of the Argive army, that is the Greek army. Antigone and her sister are speaking at the beginning of the play, and Antigone begins with this, quote, "Have they told you of the new decree of our king Creon?" Already this frames a picture for us. Creon is an autocrat who rules by his own singular decrees. Antigone quickly, as a matter of course, invites her sister to come with her to bury her brother in spite of the decree. And this part of the story is really important, very revealing. It's maybe even a little hard to understand for some of us in the 21st century because we generally don't anymore hold very many rituals to be truly, and pardon the pun here, gravely, seriously non-negotiable. The rite of burial was held in the very highest esteem by the Greeks, as it was by the Jews and by Christians until very recently. Interesting side note here about that. I mean, basically all my family now, who I think roughly self-describe as Christians, but they all plan to be cremated, which is weird because, I mean, the idea of cremate, like, that's not what Christians are supposed to be doing. You're supposed to be buried because there's going to be a literal bodily resurrection, or at least that was the traditional belief. I'm not saying I'm going to rule on this, but it's interesting, isn't it, that Christianity sort of, I don't know, just sort of changed. Like, Christians have just kind of changed their mind on that in the last 30 years. Like, I asked my dad about it. He was like, I don't know, man, a whole gravestone and plot, that's too expensive, And it's like, I mean, okay. But anyway, they did believe this was like a crucial human right in the ancient Greek world, okay? Now, the fact that Antigone's sister, Ismene, hesitates gives us a whole psychological study about where these two are in terms of their, and what shall we call it, their political psychological cycle. That's the phrase I wrote down here. What does that phrase indicate? Well, the idea is that a person can only achieve or fall prey to certain thoughts at certain moments in history. Check out this tweet to sort of exemplify the idea I'm trying to convey here. This guy, Adrian Vermeulen, recently followed me, so why not share? It's an interesting idea, right? I'll let you read it as I continue. Anyway, the point is Ismene's hesitation about whether it's that important to bury her brother is sort of only conceivable after a certain stage of cultural degradation has been accepted. And Antigone herself isn't there yet. She's a holdout from the old era where no matter what a man did while he was living, he is entitled to a proper burial. Well, to turn the heat up, Antigone delivers the whole story here on the next page to her sister. She says, the penalty will be stoning to death in the public square. And when she finishes announcing the situation to her sister, she says, there it is. And now you can prove what you are, a true sister or a traitor to your family. And look, being a traitor to the state is no small thing. I mean, that's why we know who Benedict Arnold is, right? But the question here is whether the state can insert itself between you and your family, to whom, of course, you also have an important duty, and who, by implication, you can similarly betray if you choose to. I mean, here we go with the Harry and Meghan stuff. Another piece of this is that there's a line in here that says, Ismene says to Antigone, we are only women. And what she means, like archetypally, is that they are out of their lane to even attempt such a thing. I mean, the king has ruled. And this isn't a negotiation, right? After I read this play the other day, I stayed up with my wife and I watched the Oprah interview with Harry and Meghan, who accused the British royal family of all manner of wrongdoing. And I want to say, I significantly sympathize with the royals, really as much as an American can. I'm a big fan of The Crown, as you guys know. I heard the other day that the guy who wrote that is like a royalist. And I mean, if you want the sort of pro-royal family view, you should watch The Crown and get into it with me. But like, as much as I sympathize with them, I think we can use that scandal to understand the almost super political significance of the question posed by the conflict in Sophocles' play, in Antigone. Which side is justified is finally a judgment call, I suppose. But I think it's clear that Harry and Meghan at least believe themselves to be doing something similar to what Antigone did. They believe that the state, or the monarchy, sort of commanded them to behave one way, but they, driven by their conscience, which is more sacred, in their judgment at least, felt justified in behaving another way, in defying the order of their political superiors. This is, of course, the same story with Socrates, the same story with Jesus. This terrible dynamic, has to be demonstrated again and again in stories and in paintings and plays. And then, when it's forgotten, it has to be lived again until it is understood again. Jesus knew exactly what he had to do to not get crucified, right? But he felt a higher duty, a claim higher than the states or the synagogues. Ismene is tasked with defending the coward's view in this story. I know not what else to call it. Maybe the strategically realistic perspective, if you're like a Luke Ford fan or something. She says, quote, "We are only women. We cannot fight with men, Antigone. The law is strong. We must give in to the law. In this thing, and in worse, I beg the dead to forgive me, but I am helpless. I must yield to those in authority. And I think it's a dangerous business to always be meddling." But, I just can't swallow that pill, and I don't particularly want to be friends, even, with people who prefer that view. If you're not more moved by what Antigone replies, then we aren't really on the same page. She says, quote, "You have made your choice. You can be what you want to be, but I will bury him. And if I must die, I say that this crime is holy. Apparently, the laws of gods mean nothing to you." End quote. That holy, you guys, it is holy. Because if there is no Antigone, then Creon's rule becomes unlimited. His whim can never be checked if there is no Antigone, just as Caiaphas and Pilate cannot be challenged without a Jesus. Now, I'm not saying you, listener, have to be Antigone or be Jesus. That's really difficult. And in fact, sometimes I think the arch difficulty of going through with it, of seeing it through all the way to the end, of being that guy, the one who defies with clear eyes the edict of the king, I think the difficulty of doing that is almost what makes Jesus God. That's a stretch, but it's like if there is a secular way of explaining what it means to say Jesus was God, this is it. Could you do that? No? Well, almost no one could. But once upon a time, one guy actually fucking did it, all the way to the cross. And in doing it, he ended a whole age of chaos and strife and corruption. In doing it, he made the world natural again. And that is what Antigone is about. There are people who read Carl Schmitt or who support a Catholic imperium who actually like the idea of the state having a final claim on things. To hear Creon put it, quote, he says, "No traitor is going to be honored with the loyal man. But whoever shows by word and deed that he is on the side of the state, he shall have my respect." I understand the Schmitt people. I understand Creon. In some way, it makes sense for the state to claim ultimate authority. For the Catholics, I kind of struggle to understand it. I've flirted with the idea of wanting a Christian state. I certainly have. I get the appeal. But ultimately, the very essence of the story of Jesus involves refusing the authority of the state. And so, I don't know. Maybe the right thing is for the state to claim total and final authority, but for us philosophers to also realize that sometimes, eventually, now and then, at the end of an age or whatever, some hero will defy that claim. It's inevitable. That's the dynamic we see when Creon speaks to Antigone. He says, and the stage instructions say, slowly, dangerously, quote, "And you, Antigone, with your head hanging, do you confess this thing?" And this is the equivalent of Pilate asking Jesus if he's the king of the Jews, right? And she, Antigone, says, "I do confess it. I deny nothing." Man, it's so good, isn't it? And so I guess what I'm saying is maybe from the Hegelian or Parmenidean perspective, both sides are sort of correct, or at least inevitable politically. They both make, The state makes its inevitable totalizing claim, and then, just as inevitably, a rebel refuses to accept that claim. And the state inevitably kills the rebel, but in doing so, the state destroys its own authority. And this is the dance we do. This is the round and round we go, right? Well, when she says that, when she says, I deny nothing, Creon can't believe it. And in fact, his disbelief shows that he is in fact not as heroic as the rebel. Do you understand the importance of that? It's amazing. Her defiance and his disbelief of her defiance, because he has threatened her with death, right? And so he can't believe that she's going to go through with it anyway, because he is more of a coward than her, and that shows her to be more worthy in a very real, important, meritocratic sense than he is. He can't even understand her courage. And again, the wheel turns in that sense. He says to her, you heard my proclamation, and yet you dared defy the law? And she replies, I dared. It was not God's proclamation. That final justice that rules the world below makes no such laws. Your edict, king, was strong, but all your strength is weakness itself against the immortal, unrecorded laws of God. They are not merely now, they were and shall be operative forever, beyond man utterly. Isn't this amazing stuff? I mean, the idea that the Greeks never conceived of God, or whatever the Straussians say, is shown to be just total bullcrap here. If anything, they understood 4 centuries before Jerusalem would exactly what God looks like when he enters politics. This logos thing that I'm trying to describe, I'm saying Sophocles got a glimpse of it. It happens like the trees shoot leaves every spring. It happens. Do you understand? You can't get around it. That's why it's so important to understand it, and why why it had to be announced. It had to be announced. I hope you understand where I'm going with this. Anyway, when the people hear of Antigone's defiance, the people of Thebes, they honor her, though they're afraid to say so publicly. Frustrated, Creon at one point lashes out, saying, quote, the state is king. But at that point, his own son Haman says, yes, if the state is a desert. And the point is, the people sided with God's justice, not with the state and its edicts. They may not have all had the courage to do anything about it, you understand, but when someone did, when someone finally stood up to it, they knew which side they were on. Eventually, by the way, Ismene basically begs to be sentenced to death with her sister. She regrets her own lack of resolve from the beginning of the drama. In the end, everything kind of falls apart. The king realizes his own mistake, and he goes to find Antigone in hopes of freeing her from the cave he had her locked away in as punishment. What he finds when he gets there is her dead by hanging herself, and his son, Haman, who somehow snuck into the cave, her husband, Antigone's husband, clutching the body. Creon, tries to apologize to his son, but his son takes a stab at him with his sword and then runs himself through. He stabs himself. Creon returns home after this sort of awful, tragic scene, only to be told that his wife has also killed herself. I guess the result here is that basically Antigone's defiance ruined them all. Essentially all the royal family imploded because she stood up for the laws of God. The last 4 lines of the play read, quote, there is no happiness where there is no wisdom. No wisdom, but in submission to the gods. Big words are always punished, and proud men in old age learn to be wise. I guess what I take there, I mean, the idea that like wisdom is submission to the gods. What we say on this channel is wisdom is submission to the logos, to reality, to the order of things. And so if there are laws coming from the state, whatever that state is, whether elected or oligarchic or whatever, subverters or whatever it is, if they start to legislate in a way that undermines wisdom or works against the logos, it will not stand. Like literally, the universe won't tolerate it. And big words are always punished, right? Seriously, you guys, it's one of the most moving dramas I've ever read. And for me, it helps me. Like it helps me in my soul, I guess. Reading, I guess what I would say is that reading Sophocles, reading Antigone, helps me understand the monumental thing that Jesus accomplished and understand it better. I mean, we all feel the pressing irrationality of so much of political policy these days. But how many of us dare defy the orders, especially when the consequences start to happen? It's not easy, but eventually, the point is, someone will rise to the challenge and do the right thing, no matter what the state threatens. And, by the way, it will probably be someone like Antigone, who has had a terribly hard life, who has felt wronged from childhood, who has tried to stay loyal to her father in spite of difficulties, etc., etc. You understand? And so, in a way, like, once you understand that, and I mean, whatever, maybe it's going to be you. Like, I've seen these videos of people who don't want to wear the mask trying to just not wear the mask, and like, it's ridiculous. People will tackle them in the aisle at the grocery store. I mean, like, that's the beginning of this. That is the beginning of the Antigone story. At this point, what happens? Nothing. You get a fine of $250 or something. But eventually, they'll keep pushing. They'll keep pushing, and people will be thrown in jail or whatever. And they'll do the same thing if you don't take the vaccines. These are my causes, by the way. But like, surely there's some that others can think of that where the state has sort of made a claim bigger than it seems to have a right to make. And the point is, when that happens, like, I guess it can inspire courage, right? To read Jesus, to read Antigone, to think about how, like, you might do that. Remember the "What would Jesus do" bracelets that, like, the boomers all wore when we were young? Like, yeah, I guess, I mean, Jesus would not do it if he didn't think it was the right thing to do. But if you don't have the courage to go through with that, the good news is that, like, first of all, one man already did it. Jesus did it. And in that sense, to the degree to which we don't forget it, it never has to be done again. Like, that was part of that's like why we remember it, right? Like, the never forget about Christianity is like, this guy, as I said, like, I want to use the F word, even though we're talking about holy things here. It's like, he freaking did it. Because, I mean, it's so difficult to do. It's so easy, isn't it? To just, like, let someone else, like, how easy it would have been for Jesus to pass the buck, let someone else do it, to go, like, I'm not worthy, the guy who comes after me, I won't be worthy to tie his sandals. Well, we can all keep doing, that's the game of telephone forever. But eventually, the Messiah, the Savior, shows up and he just does it. He says no with thunder, and that's the end. Like, that's the end, because at that point, what happens is the state is revealed to be corrupt and less courageous, less good, less meritocratic, less holy than the one who stood up to it. And I think that's the idea in Antigone, or at least that's the part that I take away from it on this reading. Wow, you guys, 50 episodes of the podcast, and I've like some reflections here since I have a couple minutes. You can tune out if you want, whatever. Again, reminder about the Patreon stream. I hope everybody shows up on Friday to hear the discussion. If you're paying money, you should be there with me. Hope we can get some noobs on the stream. I thought it was great to have Nathan on last time. Anybody else wants to dabble, jump in next time. In reflecting on my 50 episodes, I think we've got a pretty good balance going of like kind of interesting. I mean, it's mostly classic stuff. Some of it is modern. I like doing modern stuff. I mean, I'm a modern person, mostly for worse, I suppose. But so it goes. And so it's nice to do maybe 2 classics for every modern piece, and to talk about the contrast and to try to track that stuff. Like I was thinking in my last episode, talking about Jonathan Edwards, who in some sense is like the last cry of the medievals. Like he's not Catholic, but in a sense he's almost like a scholastic. Like he's reading Calvin. Everything is God based in his mind, But like if you look at the timeline there in the 18th century, you get the Great Awakening and all this Christian thinking happening. But somehow by 1774, everybody is a deist, I mean, which is basically like an atheist at the time, and they're all into politics and stuff. So how does that shift happen in those 40 years, right? And what I've tried to communicate to you in all of these videos is that these things aren't separate. Politics and theology feed one another. Like I didn't mention this in the last episode, but as we were talking about Jonathan Edwards, right? Like Edwards says that essentially there's this like invisible, it's like Peter recognized Jesus not by extrinsic signs, not by the way he looked or talked or even the miracles he did. Like Paul Talk left a comment that said that it was the walking on water or something, but that's not even true, because the first scenes, Jesus just approaches these guys cold and says, "Follow me." And they're like, "Okay, we've had enough fishing. Let's follow this guy," right? Before he's done the miracles. And I mean, there was that big debate at the beginning of the 18th century, or the 19th century, late 18th, early 19th century, among the like German higher critics. I mean, is it because of the miracles that the authority of Jesus is established? And a lot of people thought no, like you should be able to recognize what he says as intrinsically authoritative. So these discussions about like sort of what God is and what it means for the state. I mean, I guess what I was going to say there is the idea is that what Edwards is saying seems like it's a theological idea, right? The idea that there will be a divine and supernatural light that kind of like reveals the sacred identity of the Savior or whatever. But do you notice that that's a very democratic or democratizing idea, in the sense that it's like, it strips us of the usual, like as I said, physiognomy or race or even gender potentially, or any of these things are out the window if your main focus is a divine and internal light. So maybe Edwards in that sense, though, and I don't even know if he thought he was being liberal or not. I mean, he is one of these guys who associates with the new lights in that new light, old light divide. But like maybe that was a liberalizing movement ultimately that kind of eventually, over the course of a generation or two, gave rise to like a democratic and even revolutionary mindset, in a way that I guess like earlier Calvinism, before it had been, before the commentary started piling up, before Jonathan Edwards started like adding to it, I don't think was as liberal necessarily. But anyway, so we're doing politics, sometimes we're doing psychology, sometimes spirituality. Like, these things are all kind of integrated and overlapping in the Venn diagrams. And so we'll probably continue along those lines. I think I've got an episode on Meister Eckhart I wanted to do. I got one on Liu Jun coming. I really am kind of at the end of my, I wanted to make it to episode 50 and then kind of take the rest of this week off, do the Friday stream, and then maybe I'll get one done probably by Sunday or so of next week. But I don't know what it'll be yet, so stay tuned. Thank you for your support. I hope that these episodes are, if not enlightening, at least entertaining for you, and I appreciate your support. Like I said, share it with your moms, tell your friends. The goal is to get to 1,000 followers, and then I don't know, and then from there, like take Jay Dyer out or something and take over the internet. Okay, See you next time on the Godward Podcast.